Picture this. It's Monday night, June 25th, 2007. Millions of WWE fans are tuning into Raw, expecting to see Vince McMahon's funeral after his limousine exploded the week before. Instead, they witnessed something that would haunt the wrestling industry forever. A 3-hour tribute to a man who had just committed the most heinous crime in sports entertainment history. But that was just the beginning. What followed was an unprecedented cascade of real-world tragedies, career-ending scandals, devastating injuries, intense media scrutiny, and government investigations that nearly destroyed WWE completely. By the end of 2007, the company that started the year breaking pay-per-view records would be fighting for its very survival.
New details tonight about the world wrestling star known as the Canadian Crippler, now believed to have strangled his wife and suffocated his 7-year-old son in their home. The authorities now saying that Chris Benoit killed himself after killing them over 2 days.
So what exactly made 2007 the darkest year in WWE history? How did a company riding high from WrestleMania 23's success find itself desperately trying to rebuild its reputation from the ground up? And most importantly, how did they survive when any one of these disasters should have been fatal? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change how you view professional wrestling forever. Let me take you back to that fateful weekend in June 2007, because understanding exactly how this unfolded is crucial to grasping the magnitude of what WWE faced. WWE Vengeance was set for Houston, and Chris Benoit was scheduled to defend his ECW championship against the up-and-coming CM Punk. Benoit was beloved technical wrestling master who had clawed his way from the bottom to the top of the industry. Fans respected him. Fellow wrestlers revered him. He was the embodiment of hard work paying off. But when showtime arrived, Benoit was nowhere to be found. Initially, WWE officials received word that Benoit couldn't make it due to a family emergency, something about carbon monoxide poisoning at his home in Georgia. While concerning, these things happened occasionally in wrestling. The show must go on. Johnny Nitro was quickly substituted into the match, defeating CM Punk to become the new ECW champion. Throughout that Sunday night, wrestlers kept asking the same question: where's Chris? Behind the scenes, panic was setting in. WWE officials couldn't reach Benoit by phone. Hours passed without contact. Something was terribly wrong. Monday arrived with WWE preparing for their planned 3-hour Raw special, Vince McMahon's funeral following his exploding limousine storyline. The company had spent weeks building this angle, and it was supposed to be a ratings bonanza. Then, at approximately 4 p.m. Eastern, just hours before Raw was set to air, the call came in that changed everything. Police had discovered 3 bodies at the Benoit family home in Fayetteville, Georgia: Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their 7-year-old son Daniel. In a state of shock and confusion, WWE made a decision that would haunt them forever. They scrapped the McMahon Memorial and transformed Raw into a Chris Benoit tribute show. For 3 hours, WWE superstars sat with tears in their eyes, sharing memories and showcasing Benoit's greatest matches. They showed his Royal Rumble victory, his WrestleMania XX triumph, his technical masterpieces that had made him one of the most respected wrestlers in the world. Edge broke down on camera talking about Benoit's dedication. William Regal spoke about his professionalism. It was a touching tribute to a man they all believed had died tragically alongside his family. But as the show progressed, more details emerged from the police investigation. This wasn't a family tragedy or an accident caused by carbon monoxide poisoning. Chris Benoit had murdered his wife Nancy on Friday night. He had murdered his 7-year-old son Daniel on Saturday, and on Sunday, he had taken his own life. The wrestling world had just broadcast a 3-hour tribute to a man who had committed double murder-suicide, and mainstream media was about to pounce on the industry like never before. But here's what makes this even more devastating, and why this tragedy would trigger a domino effect that nearly destroyed WWE. Within hours of the Benoit tragedy being revealed, every major news outlet in America descended upon professional wrestling like vultures circling a carcass. But this wasn't just news coverage. This was a coordinated assault designed to destroy the industry's credibility forever. CNN led the charge with Anderson Cooper dedicating entire segments to painting WWE as a cesspool of steroid abuse and violence. Fox News brought on wrestling personalities like Kevin Nash, But instead of genuine discussion, they subjected them to hostile interrogations. Anchors who had never watched a wrestling match in their lives suddenly became experts on the industry, painting every wrestler as a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. The narrative was ruthless and often dishonest. News reports would show footage of wrestlers performing high-impact moves while discussing the Benoit tragedy, creating a false connection between in-ring action and real-world violence. They portrayed wrestling fans as bloodthirsty savages who demanded increasingly dangerous content. ESPN, which had largely ignored wrestling for years, suddenly couldn't stop talking about it, but only in the most negative terms possible. SportsCenter segments would feature grim-faced anchors discussing the dark side of sports entertainment while showing the most violent clips they could find from WWE's archives. What made this media assault particularly devastating was its timing and scope. Wrestling had already been dealing with public perception problems since the end of the Attitude Era. The industry was trying to find its footing in a post-9/11 world where the rebellious, anti-authority themes that had made WWE successful seemed out of place. The Benoit tragedy gave critics the ammunition they needed to paint the entire industry as irredeemably corrupt. Every death in wrestling history was suddenly re-examined through this lens. Eddie Guerrero's heart failure was attributed to steroid abuse. The deaths of wrestlers like Curt Hennig and Rick Rude were presented as inevitable consequences of wrestling's toxic culture. But the media wasn't content to just attack WWE's past. They wanted to destroy its future. Advertisers began pulling their support. Sponsors distanced themselves from anything associated with professional wrestling. Network executives who had been happy to profit from wrestling's popularity suddenly treated WWE like a pariah. The most insidious part of this media campaign was how it painted all wrestlers with the same brush. Performers who had never touched steroids, who were model citizens and devoted family men, found themselves lumped in with the worst examples the media could find. The narrative became, if you're a professional wrestler, you're automatically suspect. This created an atmosphere of genuine fear within the wrestling community. Wrestlers began questioning whether their chosen profession was worth the stigma. Some considered leaving the business entirely. Others worried that any mistake, any controversy, would be magnified tenfold by a media establishment that seemed determined to see wrestling fail. But as devastating as this media firestorm was, WWE was about to face an even more immediate crisis that would gut their roster and expose the widespread use of performance-enhancing drugs throughout the industry. And this scandal had been brewing for months before the Benoit tragedy even occurred. While WWE was still reeling from the media assault following the Benoit tragedy, they were about to be hit with a scandal that had actually been building for months. One that would decimate their roster and expose the widespread use of performance-enhancing drugs throughout the industry. The investigation had begun in February 2007, when Sports Illustrated started looking into a potential steroid distribution network operating out of Florida. What started as routine journalism quickly expanded into something much larger when major wrestling names began appearing in prescription records. Kurt Angle was the first major star implicated, though he vehemently denied any wrongdoing. But Angle was just the tip of an iceberg that would soon sink WWE's credibility completely. On March 19, 2007, Sports Illustrated dropped their first bombshell article, revealing that multiple wrestlers had received prescriptions from Dr. David Wilbur in Arizona between November 2004 and April 2005. The initial list read like a who's who of WWE talent: Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Randy Orton, Edge, and Gregory Helms. Edge's response was particularly damaging to WWE's credibility. Rather than denying the allegations outright, he admitted to using steroids after his neck injury, explaining that they were prescribed to help bones grow back around the screws and plates in his neck. While medically justified, this admission gave critics exactly what they needed to paint WWE as a company that encouraged drug use. But the real devastation came on August 30th, 2007, when the New York Daily News published a comprehensive list of wrestlers who had received steroids and other drugs from internet doctors. 12 current WWE wrestlers were named, and the fallout was absolutely catastrophic. The suspension list read like WWE's main event roster: Chavo Guerrero, Shane Helms, Randy Orton, John Morrison, Mr. Kennedy Funaki, Charlie Haas, Umaga, William Regal, Edge, and several others were immediately suspended for violating WWE's wellness policy. The timing couldn't have been worse. WWE was already dealing with the Benoit aftermath and intense media scrutiny. Now they were losing another dozen wrestlers to suspensions, forcing them to rewrite storylines overnight and scramble to fill television time. Umaga lost the Intercontinental Championship to Jeff Hardy in a hastily arranged match. John Morrison was stripped of the ECW title and lost it to CM Punk. Countless other angles were abruptly terminated, leaving creative teams scrambling to make sense of their programming. But perhaps the most heartbreaking casualty was Mr. Kennedy's fall from grace. Kennedy had been positioned as WWE's next big star, chosen to be revealed as Vince McMahon's illegitimate son in what was supposed to be a career-defining storyline. Instead, his suspension ended his push immediately, and the angle was quickly rewritten with Hornswoggle taking his place, a decision that would be mocked for years to come. The scandal didn't stop at WWE's doors. Congress got involved, demanding records dating back to 1998. TNA was also asked to provide information, making this an industry-wide crisis that threatened the very foundation of professional wrestling. But even as WWE reeled from suspensions and media scrutiny, their problems were about to get exponentially worse. As if the Benoit tragedy and steroid scandal weren't devastating enough for WWE's roster, 2007 also became a year where it seemed like every major star was cursed to suffer career-threatening injuries at the worst possible moments. It was as if the wrestling gods themselves had declared war on sports entertainment. The injury plague began early in the year, when Triple H, WWE's cerebral assassin and one of their most reliable main event stars, suffered a devastating quadriceps tear that would sideline him for 7 months. The timing was absolutely horrible since Triple H was being planned for a high-profile WrestleMania rematch with John Cena, forcing WWE to completely rewrite their biggest show of the year at the last minute. Shawn Michaels stepped into Triple H's spot, creating what would become one of the best matches in WrestleMania history with Cena. But losing HBK's original opponent meant further reshuffling of an already complicated card. The domino effect of a single injury was already causing massive problems, and this was just the beginning of WWE's medical nightmare. The Undertaker, who had been having a career renaissance with his World Heavyweight Championship run and critically acclaimed matches against Batista, went down with a torn bicep that forced him out of action for months. Losing The Undertaker wasn't just about losing a wrestler, it was about losing an institution, a supernatural presence that had anchored WWE programming for over 15 years. Edge, fresh off winning the World Heavyweight Championship and positioned as SmackDown's top heel, suffered a pectoral injury that forced him to vacate the title he had just won. This was particularly devastating because Edge had been one of WWE's most reliable performers, someone who could work through minor injuries and deliver compelling performances even when not at 100%. Bobby Lashley, who had been built as ECW's franchise player and was being groomed for main event status, also suffered injuries that completely disrupted his momentum. Lashley had been positioned as WWE's answer to Brock Lesnar, TE, a legitimate athlete who could bridge the gap between sports entertainment and legitimate competition. But perhaps the most devastating blow came in October when John Cena, WWE's undisputed top star and the face of the company, tore his pectoral muscle during a match. Cena wasn't just WWE's biggest draw, he was their most reliable performer, someone who had carried the company through the transition from the Attitude Era to the PG era. The injury bug was so severe that by the summer of 2007, WWE's main event scene had been reduced to a skeleton crew: Batista, Rey Mysterio, Randy Orton, and King Booker. When you combine the injuries with the suspensions from the steroid scandal, WWE was left with a roster so thin that they were forced to put the World Heavyweight Championship on the Great Khali, not because he was the best choice, but because he was one of the only credible heels left standing. This perfect storm of injuries, suspensions, and tragedies forced WWE into a desperate period that would fundamentally alter the direction of professional wrestling forever. The mounting crises of 2007 forced WWE into a desperate survival mode that would fundamentally reshape the wrestling industry forever. What emerged from this chaos wasn't just a different WWE, it was a completely different philosophy about what professional wrestling could and should be. The most immediate change came in response to the Benoit tragedy and the growing understanding of CTE in contact sports. Unprotected chair shots to the head, which had been a staple of hardcore wrestling for decades, were immediately banned following the discovery that Benoit's brain showed damage equivalent to an 7-year-old Alzheimer's patient. This wasn't just a policy change. It was an acknowledgement that wrestling's most dramatic moments might be literally killing its performers. WWE also implemented stricter concussion protocols and dramatically enhanced their wellness policy, which had originally been created after Eddie Guerrero's death in 2005. More frequent testing, stricter penalties, and increased medical oversight became the new standard, as WWE tried to prove to critics that they were serious about performer safety. But the most visible and controversial change was WWE's gradual shift toward family-friendly programming. This wasn't entirely due to the 2007 controversies. There were significant financial incentives to pursuing a PG rating that would attract mainstream advertisers and sponsors who had previously avoided wrestling. However, the events of 2007 accelerated this transition dramatically. Network executives and advertisers who might have overlooked wrestling's edgier content in the past were now actively distancing themselves from anything associated with WWE's history of violence and controversy. The company needed to prove they had changed, and that meant abandoning everything that had made wrestling controversial in the first place. The move toward PG programming was evident in small changes at first. Hornswoggle began appearing in more child-friendly segments that emphasized comedy over conflict. Blood was gradually reduced and eventually eliminated from most programming. Storylines became less focused on adult themes like infidelity, substance abuse, and psychological manipulation. The gritty, urban look of Raw was abandoned in favor of brighter, more colorful production values. Hardcore matches became increasingly rare, and when they did occur, they were significantly toned down. The overall tone shifted from rebellious entertainment that parents worried about to something families could watch together. WWE's decision to transition to HD programming in 2008 provided the perfect cover for this transformation, but industry insiders knew the real motivation. The company needed to rebuild its reputation from the ground up, and that meant creating a completely different product than what had made them successful during the Attitude Era. This shift would define WWE's content for over a decade, fundamentally changing how storylines were written, how characters were developed, and what kinds of matches could be presented. Gone were the days of crash TV and shocking moments designed to generate water cooler conversation. In their place came a more sanitized, predictable product that prioritized consistency over controversy. However, even as WWE was implementing these sweeping changes to salvage their reputation, 2007 still had more tragedy in store, creating an atmosphere of genuine fear throughout the wrestling community. What had already been the darkest period in WWE history became even more devastating as a cascade of wrestler deaths created an atmosphere of genuine fear throughout the industry. It seemed like every month brought news of another performer's untimely demise, and wrestlers began to wonder if their chosen profession was literally killing them. The year had started ominously with the deaths of Bam Bam Bigelow and Mike Awesome within a month of each other in early 2007. Bigelow, the Beast from the East who had main evented WrestleMania 11 against Lawrence Taylor, was just 45 years old when he died from a drug overdose in January. His death was particularly shocking because Bigelow had seemed to be getting his life together after years of personal struggles. Mike Awesome, the former ECW and WCW champion, known for his incredible athleticism despite his massive size, was found dead at age 42 inches February. The official cause was suicide, but many in the wrestling community suspected that chronic pain from years of taking high-impact bumps had driven him to despair. March brought a particularly eerie week when Bad News Brown and Ernie Ladd died within days of each other. Brown, a former WWE wrestler and legitimate tough guy who had represented Canada in judo at the Olympics, died at age 63. Ladd, a Hall of Fame football player turned wrestler, passed away at 68. While their ages were more advanced than some of the other deaths, the timing created an unsettling pattern that had wrestlers genuinely worried about who might be next. June brought the death of Sherry Martel, the legendary sensational Sherry who had managed some of the biggest stars in wrestling history. Martel died from a drug overdose at age 49, and her death was particularly heartbreaking because she had been such a trailblazer for women in the wrestling industry. The media used each death as evidence of wrestling's toxic culture, creating a narrative that painted the entire industry as a death trap, where performers were systematically destroying their bodies and minds for entertainment. Every obituary became an indictment of professional wrestling, with reporters drawing connections between in-ring violence and real-world tragedy. August brought yet another devastating loss when Bryan Adams, known to fans as Crush from his time in WWE, and as a member of the NWO in WCW, died at age 43 from mixing prescribed medications. Adams had been dealing with chronic pain issues stemming from his wrestling career, and his death highlighted the dangerous cycle of prescription drug abuse that many wrestlers fell into while trying to manage their injuries. The constant drumbeat of death created a psychological toll on active wrestlers that went beyond just mourning their fallen colleagues. Many began to question whether the physical and mental demands of professional wrestling were worth the risks. Some considered leaving the business entirely, while others became obsessed with their own mortality. This atmosphere of fear and uncertainty made it even more difficult for WWE to maintain morale and focus during an already impossible year. But somehow, despite everything that had gone wrong, the company managed to survive. Looking back at 2007, it's remarkable that WWE survived at all. Any one of these crises could have ended a smaller company. The combination of all of them should have been fatal to even a corporation as large and established as World Wrestling Entertainment. Yet, somehow, Vince McMahon and his team managed to navigate through the darkest year in wrestling history and emerge on the other side. The key to WWE's survival was their willingness to completely reinvent themselves. This wasn't just about changing their programming or implementing new policies. It was about fundamentally altering the DNA of what WWE represented as a company and as a form of entertainment. The transition to PG programming, while controversial among longtime fans, proved to be a masterstroke from a business perspective. By 2008, WWE had secured new television deals that were more lucrative than their previous agreements, largely because advertisers felt comfortable associating their brands with the new, family-friendly WWE product. The enhanced wellness policy, while initially seen as an overreaction by some wrestlers, ultimately helped WWE avoid future scandals and demonstrated to critics that the company was serious about performer safety. The policy wasn't perfect, and there would be future violations, but it represented a genuine commitment to change that helped rebuild WWE's credibility. Perhaps most importantly, WWE's leadership team learned valuable lessons about crisis management that would serve them well in future controversies. The company developed better communication strategies, more robust legal protections, and a deeper understanding of how to work with media rather than against them. The roster depletion caused by injuries and suspensions also forced WWE to develop new stars more quickly than they might have otherwise. Performers like CM Punk, who might have spent more time in developmental, were thrust into main event roles out of necessity. This accelerated development process ultimately strengthened WWE's talent pool and created a more diverse roster. From a creative standpoint, the limitations imposed by the PG rating forced WWE's writers to become more innovative in their storytelling. Without the ability to rely on shock value and extreme content, they had to focus on character development, long-term storytelling, and more sophisticated narrative techniques. The financial impact of 2007's crises was significant but not fatal. WWE's stock price took a beating, and the company faced increased scrutiny from investors and regulators. However, their diversified revenue streams, including merchandise, live events, and international expansion, helped cushion the blow from reduced television advertising revenue. Most importantly, WWE's survival of 2007 proved the resilience of professional wrestling as a form of entertainment. Despite predictions that the industry would collapse under the weight of its controversies, wrestling fans remained loyal, and new audiences were attracted by the cleaner, more accessible product. The lessons learned in 2007 would shape WWE's approach to business for the next decade and beyond. The company became more conservative in its content, more proactive in its health and safety measures, and more sophisticated in its corporate governance. But the question remains, was this transformation worth it? As we look back at 2007 from today's perspective, it's clear that this dark year fundamentally changed not just WWE, but the entire professional wrestling industry. The company that emerged from these crises was dramatically different from the one that had started the year with such promise, and the effects of that transformation are still being felt today. The immediate aftermath saw WWE become a more corporate, sanitized version of itself. The wild, unpredictable energy that had defined the Attitude Era was replaced by a more controlled, family-friendly product that prioritized consistency over controversy. While this approach was financially successful and helped WWE avoid future scandals, it also alienated many longtime fans who felt the company had lost its edge. The wellness policy implemented in response to the steroid scandal became a model for other wrestling promotions and helped legitimize professional wrestling as a form of athletic entertainment rather than just spectacle. However, it also created new challenges as wrestlers struggled to maintain their physiques and performance levels without the pharmaceutical assistance that had been commonplace in previous eras. The ban on unprotected chair shots and increased focus on concussion protocols undoubtedly saved lives and prevented countless injuries. Modern wrestlers are more aware of the long-term health consequences of their profession, and companies are more proactive about protecting their performers. This represents genuine progress that emerged from tragedy. Perhaps most significantly, 2007 marked the end of wrestling's outlaw period. For decades, professional wrestling had operated on the margins of mainstream entertainment, proud of its rebellious, anti-establishment identity. The events of 2007 forced the industry to mature and join the corporate mainstream, with all the benefits and drawbacks that entailed. The media scrutiny that seemed so devastating at the time ultimately helped wrestling gain more mainstream acceptance. By surviving the worst possible publicity and emerging with a cleaner image, WWE proved that professional wrestling could be a legitimate form of family entertainment rather than just a guilty pleasure for adult audiences. Today's WWE is undeniably safer, more professional, and more socially responsible than the company that existed before 2007. Wrestlers have better health care, more comprehensive drug testing, and greater awareness of the long-term consequences of their profession. The product is more accessible to mainstream audiences and more attractive to corporate sponsors. But something was also lost in this transformation. The unpredictability, the edge, the sense that anything could happen at any moment, these elements that had made wrestling compelling were sacrificed in the name of safety and respectability. Whether this trade-off was worth it remains a subject of debate among wrestling fans. What's undeniable is that WWE's survival of 2007 demonstrated the incredible resilience of both the company and professional wrestling as a form of entertainment. Despite facing challenges that should have been fatal, wrestling not only survived, but eventually thrived in new ways. The darkest year in WWE history ultimately became the foundation for a new era of sports entertainment, one that was safer, more professional, and more sustainable than what came before.